Hello everybody, my name is Connor and welcome back to the Paleopage. And I just gotta say, happy Jurassic June. It's been an amazing Jurassic June. We've gotten things like brand new merchandise, especially some Jurassic Park 3 stuff, which I'm really excited about. I even got the Jurassic Park 3 male raptor. I love Quilliam. We of course got the Jurassic World Evolution 3 Rebirth DLC, which is really awesome. I still need to play the campaign. I'm getting there eventually. It's gonna be a tradition with me that Jurassic World Evolution 3 campaigns will be a little bit late, I decided, I guess. We've of course played LEGO Jurassic World here on the channel, but there's been one question I've been asking myself throughout the entirety of June. And that question of course has been, why didn't Jurassic Park work? What went wrong? And, as the title implies, could Jurassic Park work? Now, what went wrong with John Hammond's original park? Well, a couple things. Firstly, Jurassic Park was extremely understaffed, and the staff they did have was extremely unqualified to work with massive dangerous animals. Majority of the workers at Jurassic Park were just desperate people trying to feed their families from Costa Rica. And they were likely not given any background checks for experience or any training to be working around these animals. Which, to be fair, how do you train for working with a T-Rex? But that's beside the point. And as for the qualified staff, people like Nedry or Ray Arnold, there were so few of them. The park was so understaffed. The entire control room was held together by like 3 people, which, believe it or not, is not enough people to run an entire zoo or theme park, let alone one 100 miles off the coast of Costa Rica. And this led to things such as mismanagement of the park itself, as we saw in the movie, with Nedry disabling just all the power. But of course it also led to mismanagement of the animals, because there were no specialists there in order to ensure that the enclosures were good for the animals. That led to things like the sick Triceratops getting sick from eating a poisonous plant that was inside of its enclosure. Another problem would have been the enclosures themselves. While the size of them was really good for the animals, they wouldn't have lived in a jungle most likely. None of the 7 animals we see in Jurassic Park would have lived in a jungle like we see today on Isla Nublar. This means for the animals, they have to experience a whole new terrains, whole new climates, sometimes whole new vegetations that they shouldn't be eating because it could get them sick, again with the sick Triceratops. And finally, the location of the park itself was really stupid on Hammond's part, I won't lie. I get the whole, grand adventure aspect of it, but why would you put Jurassic Park on an island hundreds of miles away from the mainland? Why would you put it on an island that is known to have a volcano, which, if you asked any geologist, you could probably have known would have erupted in 30 years. You just quadrupled your prices in shipments of food and equipment and even people and staff. And then how do you get people onto your island? We saw in Jurassic World that it took Zach and Gray a whole flight down to Costa Rica and then a ferry to the island from Costa Rica just to get into the park. How did they afford that? You would need to save up your entire life savings in order to go to Jurassic Park, especially in today's economy, when flights are ungodly expensive. So, how can we fix that? Given we could have good management, qualified staff, and a good location, could Jurassic Park have worked? Because we house animals all the time for public entertainment, if you would. We call them zoos. And zoos, I'm not gonna say they're for purely entertainment. They are good for conservation. That's a whole topic for another day that I'm really passionate about and I'd love to talk about. But for today, we're not going to get into all of that. We'll talk about some of it, though, when it comes to housing specifically dinosaurs. And, of course, there's the obvious. We can't clone a non-avian dinosaur because the DNA is long dead by now. But if we somehow could bring them back via genetics somehow, or maybe we could prehistoric park Nigel Marvin our way back in time in order to bring them back to the present. If we somehow could bring back the dinosaurs, could we house them in a sort of zoo? Alright, some initial concerns when it comes to housing dinosaurs is their behavior. Because zoo enclosures for modern animals, they have to be built around enrichment and encouraging diverse behaviors for the housed species based on what we know about their behavior in the wild. Now, we're talking about animals that have been extinct for tens of millions of years. And while some behaviors can be kind of inferred by fossils alone, we really have no idea how dinosaurs would have been reacting to different stimuli. So how can we design an enclosure around that? Now for animals like hadrosaurids, thanks to the Maiasaura, or oviraptorids, thanks to Psittacipati, we can infer some parental behavior sometimes. And also due to pathologies, we can infer that T-Rex bit each other's snouts sometimes. Or, hey, maybe some dinosaurs did a little dance in order to do like a mating ritual. But other than that, we have really no idea how they would have acted. And even for the species we do know sort of the behavior of, that can differ wildly between species, even of the same animal. Speaking of parental behaviors, you of course need to see reproductive behaviors, which can be guessed through things like trackways sometimes. Again, I talked about the dancing for the fossil trackways that show some sort of theropod dancing like a modern secretary bird would. But we don't know if species were monogamous. Do they mate roughly? Maybe hadrosaurs did, we don't know. Do they nest in giant colonies? And a little bit scarier, how many offspring do these animals produce when they breed? You see, one of the smart things Jurassic Park did was try to make all their dinosaurs female. Now, of course, that didn't work out in the end. However, it is a smart idea because of reasons we'll talk about later. Animals like sauropods are thought to have laid dozens of eggs. Back when they would have lived, they would have laid a bunch of eggs because the chances were that not all of them would survive. Only the best of the best would survive. And so, having a bunch of babies instead of just one greatly increases the odds of your genes carrying on. However, how do you ethically recreate that in a zoo setting without killing babies? But then on the other hand, how do you care for 30 or more hatchling sauropods? And even worse, as they grow up, how do you care for 30 adult sauropods? Now, when it comes to feeding, we have no idea what these animals were eating, actually. We can look at the flora in their formations and maybe isotopic signatures in their teeth, for sure. We could sometimes even look at preserved gut contents of some dinosaurs, even though that's a little bit rare. But finding a dietary system that would keep them in the ideal shape and health is next to impossible. Additionally, how much do you have to feed them? How often do you have to feed them? How do you even acquire enough food to keep a full-grown megatheropod, or worse, a sauropod, happy? Now we talk about environments, something Jurassic Park really failed at. And even Jurassic World failed at to some degree. While some fossil formations we have an amazing idea of what they were like at this point in paleontology, places like the Hell Creek or the Morrison, for example, a lot of formations we have no idea what they were like. And then we have no specific idea of what habitats within said environments our species would have been occupying, or what niches they would have filled. How do you accurately design an enclosure without knowing the home of the animal to a T? Because zoo enclosures have to be designed in order to mimic the home of the species in question. Of course, for the public to sort of learn what environments they would have been living in, but also for the animals to be happy within said enclosure. Speaking of designing an enclosure, how big do you make said enclosures? How large of a fence would keep in a T-Rex? How do you keep your staff safe when they need to work with giant megapredators? Also, it's thought that dinosaurs would have had amazing senses like sight, smell, and hearing. Especially Tyrannosaurus. It had pretty much the best senses of any predator ever. How do you design enclosures and space them out properly so you don't stress out the animals and overwhelm their senses? And then, if the animals are stressed out, or even just unhealthy, or even injured, how would we know? We have a decent understanding of their anatomy to a degree, but not enough to know if they were in perfect shape or a day away from dying. What patterns look healthy and which ones don't? How do we know? Of course, our specialists could again look at fossils, but again, that gives us such a limited view into what a healthy animal looks like. And now for the most realistic problem of all. How expensive are these animals? Not just in feeding and care, but also in enclosure maintenance and special training, the cloning even, or the time machine, depending on what we go with. And the worst problem that Jurassic Park faced specifically. What do you do if a dinosaur escapes? However, I still believe that with proper management and with properly skilled people, Jurassic Park could have worked. So, with the help of the game Jurassic World Evolution 3, we will now see if Jurassic Park could have worked. I think I need a bit of a better attire to do so though, so give me 1 second. I'm just gonna sort of blip this off in 3, 2, 1. Oh, that's so much better. Zookeeper Connor is ready to build Jurassic Park. That is really stupid, okay. Now, we will not be building this park on Isla Nublar. Our location is going to be a little bit different. It's actually going to be the location that John Hammond first considered when he was, smart about where he should put his park. We're going to San Diego. As mentioned in The Lost World, this area, or California in general, is already known for its animal attractions. Here in San Diego, there's of course the San Diego Zoo, there's a SeaWorld, and California is also known for some of its paleo attractions. A little bit more north in LA, we of course have the La Brea Tar Pits. So somewhere here in California would be good. Also, the climate would have been pretty much okay for most of the dinosaurs we had in the park. And given our mainland location, not only can we get more food, we can get more equipment, we can get staff easier, but we can also get more people, and people don't have to pay as much to come to our park. They don't have to pay for a flight and a ferry. They can just pay for a ticket, come park here, and then just walk on in. They don't need 92 different steps, which most people wouldn't want to do. And overall, we might end up getting more money because we're getting so many more people. We of course also have food for our guests and shelter. The visitor center had to be in there. We have decorations, seating is a big thing. And the first animal that people will see as they go into the park will be the Gallimimus. Gallimimus I thought would be a good starting animal for the park. Your first animal in a zoo should be something a little bit smaller, a little bit more manageable, but also something colorful and energetic to really get you excited for what's to come next in your zoo or park. Many zoos often use animals like meerkats or flamingos is a big one. I've seen parrots, and a big one around my area at least is penguins. So I think Gallimimus is a good starting point. Gallimimus lived in the late Cretaceous Mongolian Gobi Desert, also known as the Namek Formation. Several fossils of this animal were first found in the 60s, and the holotype was named in 1972. Gallimimus means chicken mimic due to the similar neck vertebrae to those of modern galliforms, or chickens. At the time, this was the most complete and best preserved ornithomimid yet discovered. It is also the largest known ornithomimid, reaching roughly 20 feet long and roughly 6'3" tall at the hip, as well as reaching somewhere between 880 and 1,090 pounds. Gallimimus very likely had feathers, as evidenced by the close relative Ornithomimus having been found to have feathers. Compared to others within the Ornithomimid family, Gallimimus had a small but long head with very large eyes on the sides. It had no teeth, but it did have a keratinous beak, but also a very delicate jaw. Their forelimbs were very weak and unable to grab things, but they did have very long and very strong hind legs. This likely made them cursorial animals, very fast runners, running away from predators. Their speed has been estimated at between 29 and 34 miles an hour. Their vision and their intelligence may have been comparable to modern ratites like ostriches, emus, cassowaries, rheas, and of course kiwis. They also likely lived in groups, evidenced by several specimens being preserved in a bone bed together. Over the past couple decades, their diet has been kind of debated. Their mobile neck may be allowed for small ground prey to be captured. Maybe they were opportunistic omnivores, that's the main idea, but also it's been considered maybe they're filter feeders, or maybe they were even just strict herbivores. And as for other behaviors, we don't know their reproduction, their nesting, or parental behavior. All of that is unknown as far as I know, and it's not really known in ornithomimids as a whole, so we can't really compare, Their home environment of the Namek Formation had river channels, mudflats, and shallow lakes and floodplains. It's thought to have been a very similar environment to the Okavango Delta in Botswana. The area experienced periodic droughts evidenced by caliche, or smoothened rocks in the area. They lived alongside many organisms like mollusks, fishes, turtles, crocodilomorphs like Shamasuchus, the occasional mammal here or there, many birds like Gurlinia, Judinornis, or Teviornis, and of course dinosaurs like Tarchia, Prenocephalae, Saurolophus, Barsboldia, Nemegtosaurus, Alioramus, Tarbosaurus, Xanabazar, Mononychus, and maybe Velociraptor, as well as Therizinosaurus, Nemectomia, and the giant Dinochirus. Flora, or plants that we know from the area, include Araucarian conifers, which are likely the dominant plants, but also cane grasses, ginkgos, duckweeds, water lotuses, cycads, reed grasses, sycamores, indeterminate pondweeds, cypresses, trochodendroids, Coruxia, and Zincoboropsis, according to Wikipedia at least. As for a modern analog, it's kind of a mix-up. The closest physically, of course, would be the ostrich. Behaviorally, however, they were kind of closer to the greater rhea due to their inferred flocking behavior. But for our enclosure design, we'll be taking into consideration the AZA manual for ostriches, which, according to that, each ostrich needs at least 250 to 300 square meters in space. The enclosure must be generally flat and open to provide space to run, and flocks should allow for positive intraspecific interactions. They need a very high fence, maybe 2.5 to 3 meters tall, to prevent jumping out, and it must be made of very durable material to prevent breakage. Also, they require some shelter. And with all those requirements, this is how big the Gallimimus enclosure should be. So, let's get to building it. We have 6 Gallimimus in here. Now, in Jurassic World Evolution 3, we're using Ornithomimus to represent Gallimimus because, frankly, Ornithomimus looks better than the Jurassic Gallimimus. I like the feathers more, I won't lie. The enclosure, I think, turned out really well. They have a little area filled with conifers and hay for them to eat. Hay, I don't know if we could really be feeding them because they wouldn't have had many grasses in the late Cretaceous. But they also have 3 different shelters, a couple enrichment things like a ball, as well as a mirror for them to look in. Maybe that would be for some like research purposes. And of course we have a way in the back for staff to get into the enclosure. And yeah, this enclosure I think turned out really well. And now we're gonna move on to the Deinonychus. Deinonychus comes to us from the mid-Cretaceous North American cloverleaf formation. This medium-sized dromaeosaurid was first named in 1969, infamously starting off the dinosaur renaissance. Its smaller body, horizontal spine, and raptorial claws indicated that it was an agile predator, something a little new for dinosaur paleontology back in the day. The name Deinonychus means terrible claw, due to the large sickle claw on the second toe of each foot, which could have reached about 5 inches long and would have had a keratinous sheath over top. Now, I am of course saying Deinonychus instead of Velociraptor because a zoo's job is also to educate the public. We did have something about, hey, these aren't Velociraptors, these are Deinonychus. We messed up back in the 90s, whoopsie daisies. Now about the size of these animals themselves, they could have reached roughly 10'10" to 11'2" in length, and their hip would have been about as high as 2'9". So not nearly as large as the animals we see in Jurassic Park. Those are still incredibly large for Deinonychus standards, especially large for Velociraptor standards, but again, we're going off of real Deinonychus. And also, they would have weighed roughly from 132 to 161 pounds, though an upper estimate of 220 pounds has been proposed before. These animals had roughly 70 curved and blade-like teeth. They also had a much more boxy skull than that of Velociraptor, though not as triangular of a skull as once thought. They had large hands with 3 claws each, and their hind foot of course had that sickle claw on the second toe, which was likely used for predation, but we'll talk about that in a second. Deinonychus also more than likely had feathers due to close relatives having feathers like Microraptor, though we have no direct evidence of feathers in Deinonychus. The claws and hands of these dromaeosaurs were once thought to have been puncture and gripping elements, supporting a prey capture or grappling or climbing function even. However, in 2011, a new hypothesis proposed the raptor prey restraint model for predation, where they would leap onto prey, pin it down, and grip it with that sickle claw, and then they would have sort of reached down with their head and eaten its prey, potentially alive. Similar to the eating and hunting strategy of modern birds of prey like hawks and eagles. They also likely used their wings as flapping stabilizers to balance on top of their prey, and also their tail would have acted as a counterbalance. It's thought that their jaws had a pretty weak bite force, comparatively, so they might have been using very saw-like bites similar to a Komodo dragon. It's also thought now that their claws were used less for slashing like we thought in Jurassic Park, and more for stabbing, like quick stabs. Their hands were also great at grasping and pulling objects towards their chest. Now, Deinonychus might not have been the speedy hunter as often depicted, especially in Jurassic Park. They compared the foot-tibia ratio, which is a metric used to determine speed, of dromaeosaurs like Deinonychus with other modern theropods and ancient theropods, prehistoric theropods, in order to see how sort of fast these guys would have been comparatively. For modern running birds like the ostrich, it was 0.95. For Struthiomimus, a fast non-avian theropod, it was around 0.68. For Deinonychus, it was only 0.48. While certainly not slow by any means, it wasn't particularly fast either. And when they were at their highest speeds, they likely wouldn't have been able to do them for a long time. This kind of indicates that dromaeosaurids were almost more like cats than wolves, as we saw in Jurassic Park. As for behavior, multiple sites show multiple Deinonychus in relation to a Tenontosaurus, maybe indicating pack behavior. However, it also may have been more similar to Komodo dragon feeding frenzies, with multiple animals even fighting/eating each other around a dead prey item. This hypothesis, however, was questioned in 2007, when supposed Deinonychus tracks were found in parallel trackways, indicating pack behavior again. So maybe they weren't hunting like wolves, but also maybe not like Komodo dragons, maybe more similar to the hunting strategies of crocodilians. They likely practiced very ratite-like parenting, as evidenced by the 2001 Utah raptor bundle, which included a baby. Also, they likely brooded on top of their eggs, with nests being from roughly 4 to 6 eggs per litter, though that's just a guess, we don't really know for sure. However, it's unknown how often these eggs would have been laid, but we do have kind of an idea that Deinonychus eggs were blue. So, cool, I guess. Doesn't really help us here, but it's cool to know. The environment of the Cloverleaf Formation was a floodplain, consisting of a tropical/subtropical forest, deltas, lagoons, maybe similar to modern Louisiana. They lived alongside dinosaurs like Sauropelta, Tenontosaurus, Aquilops, Acrocanthosaurus, and Sauroposeidon. Also, there might have been Deinonychus fossils found in Maryland, which would mean that Deinonychus also lived alongside Astrodon and the potentially massive Proconodon, though it's unknown if these fossils in Maryland are actually Deinonychus, so take that with a grain of salt. Anyways, the closest modern analog I could think of for Deinonychus would maybe be something like a hawk, or maybe a caracara for the hunting and behavioral social structure. But physically, in size, they were closer to maybe like a jaguar. We're gonna use the metrics for the jaguar as provided by the Association of Zoos and Aquariums, which is the AZA. I probably said their name earlier, but I didn't elaborate on what it was, so I'm elaborating now. Anyways, for jaguars, for a single animal, the outdoor habitat has to be no less than 91 square meters, increasing by 50% per individual, so 3 animals would be 182 square meters. There should be an additional 50% indoor area per individual. Their indoor space should also be around 3 to 4 meters tall. Their enclosure should incorporate a pool, in the jaguar's case, because they like to swim. In our case, because the environment would have been a floodplain. And there should be plenty of climbing structures. Perhaps in the back area, there would also be a training area for research purposes to actually determine Deinonychus intelligence. But with the jaguar metrics, we can now do a bunch of math to comparatively compare the size of a Deinonychus to a jaguar and multiply that ratio to these metrics given for the jaguar. And with that, this is how big the Deinonychus enclosure should be. Honestly, not that far off from the Deinonychus enclosure in Jurassic Park. Well, given those were larger animals, but if they were normal-sized Deinonychus, it would have been roughly about this size, or needed to be at least. But also, these are the minimum requirements given by the ACA, so likely enclosures would have been larger. But without further ado, let's build the Deinonychus enclosure. This enclosure, of course, has 2 viewing areas, really cool. Glass would likely be a great way of keeping your guests separate from the animals. And also, if you have maybe one-way glass, it would not stress out the animals as much, which is a good thing. We, of course, also have anti-climb barriers over top the enclosure, which is a very good thing. You do not want your animals climbing out, and this is what real zoos use as well, as anti-climb barriers. We, of course, have their backstage area, which I didn't really design in this video, I just used a blueprint I had. There are, of course, also plenty of climbing structures in the enclosure, things for them to go under, things for them to climb on top of. They have that pool at the front, and also the area is kind of themed around the cloverleaf formation, because again, we have to sort of provide education for our guests. They need to learn something while they're here. And now we move on to the next theropod. We're moving on to the Dilophosaurus. Dilophosaurus weatherli lived in the early Jurassic Kayenta Formation. The environment was seasonally dry, with sand dunes coming in and out of a wet conifer forest, which is where the animals would have likely have lived. These animals included mammals like the Kayentatherium, crocodilomorphs like Protosuchus, and of course other dinosaurs like the Ceratosaurus and the Scutellosaurus, which would all have been prey items for the Dilophosaurus. Unlike what Jurassic Park depicts, Dilophosaurus would have been the apex predator of its environment, as well as overall one of the largest animals of its area and time. Again, unlike what Jurassic Park depicts, it would have been roughly 624 to 880 pounds when fully grown, with the upper estimate likely being the maximum. And this animal would have also been about 19'9" or 23 feet long. Its respiratory system, which would have been very similar to that of modern birds and crocodilians, because no duh, indicates a very fast, active, agile hunter, potentially running a top speed of 27 to 43 miles an hour. Dilophosaurus had a much stronger bite than we once thought, so it was not an obligate scavenger, though I'm sure if the opportunity presented itself, it would not pass up a free carcass. It's a free meal. Also, unlike we see in Jurassic Park, it likely didn't spit venom or have neck frills, as those are all things we would have fossil evidence of, like venom glands in the skull, or maybe the bones that we see in modern frilled lizards would be present, which they just aren't. Plus, being the largest predator in their area, why would they need neck frills to scare someone off? The only animal they would need to really be worried of is another Dilophosaurus. Behaviorally, Dilophosaurus could have potentially lived in or traveled in small groups, evidenced by fossil findings of 3 individuals in close proximity and the presence of a crisscrossed dilute track nearby. Though this collection of bones may have been from a flash flood deposit and the tracks could have been from an entirely different animal, it is most often inferred to be sort of group behavior. Parental behavior and reproductive behavior is also entirely unknown. The closest modern analog in terms of enclosure design that I could think of, that being the tiger in terms of structure. But in terms of interior, it kind of would be more like a Komodo dragon. But for design requirements, we're going to be going off the AZA's tiger manual. According to the AZA, the tiger design requirements, the animal must be able to be seen and monitored at all times for safety. Because, you know, if you can't see the tiger in the enclosure, that's a bad thing. You need to be able to make sure the tiger is in the enclosure. Shade must be provided to prevent overheating. Tigers need climbing, but for Dilophosaurus, it probably didn't climb, so we're going to ignore that for now. Since we want multiple animals, we need to come up with a system to add/remove animals from show if needed. The outdoor enclosure area should be at least 12 meters by 12 meters, or 144 square meters, being 50% larger per extra individual. Holding areas should be at least 2.4 meters by 2.4 meters, or 5.8 square meters, but enclosures for tigers should honestly exceed these minimum requirements. So with all these metrics, this is how large the Dilophosaurus enclosure should be. So it's a little small, so we're going to make it a little bigger. So now let's build the enclosure for Dilophosaurus. Now, something you may be noticing through these enclosures for the carnivores, Deinonychus and Dilophosaurus so far, is that we are not doing live prey feeders. Because generally in zoos, feeding live prey is kind of frowned upon actually. So that's why we are not just shoving goats in our enclosures. We are providing just meat. This enclosure also has a little bit of a river to indicate sort of the riverways and sort of oasis plains that we would have seen in the Kayenta Formation. And overall, I think this enclosure is really cool. We also have a way of separating two animals if needed. And with all that out of the way, we are now moving on to one of the most majestic animals in the entirety of the Jurassic franchise, the Parasaurolophus walkeri. Parasaurolophus walkeri we only know of from the Dinosaur Park formation, which is luckily an environment that is very well documented and was very biodiverse. Neighboring dinosaurs in this environment would have included the Chasmosaurus, Styracosaurus, Struthiomimus, Corythosaurus, Gorgosaurus, Euoplocephalus, and many other big names. This area was thought to have been a setting of rivers and floodplains, as most formations are, because it's good for fossilization, slowly becoming more swampy as the Western Interior Seaway creeped in west. The area would have been a slightly warmer climate than modern Alberta, but having a wetter and drier season. Most of the plants in the area were conifers, with the majority of the flora, which would have been Parasaurolophus' food, being ferns. However, Parasaurolophus walkeri is kind of rare here, so this might have just been a single spot on its migration route. Parasaurolophus walkeri, on average, based on the known fossils, could have reached an average of 7.5 meters or 25 feet long and roughly 5,800 pounds. These animals most likely foraged and walked quadrupedally and then ran bipedally, though as far as I know this has sometimes been debated and it's still an ongoing conversation. Now, parental behavior is not directly known in Parasaurolophus, but hadrosaurs in general, as evidenced by the Maiasaur in the Egg Mountain, would have likely been taking immense care of their nests, eggs, and eventual hatchlings. These animals would have nested in large colonies, and each nest would have maybe had between, what does it say? 30 and 40 eggs. Oh no. See, the mortality rate of a baby hadrosaur back in the Cretaceous would have been very high, so you want to make a lot of babies in hopes that one of them survives or a couple of them survive in order to pass on the genes. Your chances are better. Same goes for a dinosaur we're going to talk about in a bit. But again, how do you replicate that in a zoo setting? Is it ethical to just kill off a bunch of babies? Or on the other hand of it, how do you take care of 30 to 40 extra babies and eventually 30 to 40 extra dinosaurs per nest, by the way? If there's multiple nests, you have multiple more baby hadrosaurs to take care of. So how do you do that? Seeing as they would have given birth to so many animals, these herds would have likely been enormous. Mating might have also been very messy. They probably mated very roughly. It seems that males were very clumsy when mounting females, ending up in damage or breakage to the female's neural spines at the base of the tail. The closest modern analog I could find for Parasaurolophus in terms of physicality is modern equids like horses or zebras. According to the EZA, for equids, or horses, donkeys, animals like that, zebras, breeding herds require large enclosure space, larger than those of other captive ungulates, due to the aggressive nature and social needs of these animals. For a non-breeding herd, there should be about 1,000 square feet per individual, and for a breeding herd, 2,000 square feet, or 92.9 and 185.8 square meters respectively. It's also advised that you should maybe keep the male in a separate enclosure outside of mating time in order to prevent sort of aggression. Indoor spaces for these animals should be between 300 and 500 square feet, or 28 to 46 meters, per animal if housed alone, and 400 to 600 square feet, or 37 to 55 square meters, if housed as a whole herd. Stallions, or the males, should be separated from the herd while inside always, even if it's mating season. You should also maybe give each individual animal its own stall. Equid fencing is also recommended to be at least 8 feet tall or 2.5-ish meters high, which includes if there is indeed a moat. And with those metrics, we're going to apply that to Parasaurolophus, and this is how large of an enclosure we should have. Let's get to building. really like this wire fence that I made to keep the male and the female separate, but still sort of in the same enclosure, which could also be opened if the park for some reason wanted these animals to mate. We also of course have a rock wall, which is high enough that the animals won't be jumping out. We have barns in the background that would keep the animals separate while also together if they needed to be. Also provides plenty of shelter. We have plenty of food for them to eat, and plus they can interact and socialize and all that. And if absolutely need be, we do have a gate in the background where we could potentially attach another enclosure, or maybe the holding pen that we've been releasing all these dinosaurs into at the start, in order to sort of mimic those migration routes that they would be needing in life. Now we move on to a little bit bigger of a challenge, the Triceratops. I think we're gonna go with Triceratops prorsus, which lived a little bit after Triceratops tortoise, but the environment of the Hell Creek Formation would have been generally the same after about 2 million years or so. The environment of the Hell Creek Formation would have been, you guessed it, a floodplain, because it's great for fossilization. This environment would have been covered in very dense conifer and angiosperm woodlands, but also there would have been very large prairies covered in ferns. Fossils of Triceratops have also been found in the Evanston, Scollard, Laramie, Lance, and Denver formations. Many coexistent flora and fauna are known. Triceratops would have lived alongside other ceratopsians like Torosaurus and Leptoceratops, as well as many other dinosaurs like Struthiomimus and Ornithomimus, Anzu and Kylosaurus and Denversaurus, Thescelosaurus, Edmontosaurus, Pachycephalosaurus, maybe Dakotaraptor, Nanotyrannus, and of course Tyrannosaurus. The flora or plant of this area would have been dominated again by the conifers and angiosperms, and the understory would have been covered in early flowers, ferns, and mosses. And of course there were those prairies just covered in ferns. And Triceratops also probably fed on the ferns of the prairies. Famously, Triceratops was huge. On average, it would have been around 26 to 30 feet long and between 6.6 and 11 short tons. Though the upper estimates I just said are indeed very upper, like the very top of the scale. One of the largest Triceratops horta specimens, Big John, is thought to have been just 8 meters or 26 feet long, so not quite 30, but it's still a possibility, especially with how long the horns would have been. Speaking of, the brow horns would have reached roughly 1 meter or 3-ish feet long, and they probably would have been even longer as they were covered in a keratinous sheath. Triceratops' skull was connected to its neck with essentially a ball joint, meaning that this head was incredibly mobile. Triceratops likely lived around 60 years at maximum, though this could be increased by living in captivity. Same with all these animals, as animals in captivity tend to live longer than they do in the wild, just on average. Except for great white sharks. That's a bit of a... Ew. Ceratopsid's social structure is pretty complicated, and we really don't kind of understand it. It's very likely that these animals herded in a sort of hierarchy, with the older animals having dominance over younger animals, similar to we see in bison or elephants. The males might have been very aggressive, territorial in rut season, so if we have a male, let's have a way of keeping him separate. Also, I could not find a number of eggs per nesting season, nor if the animals would have been taken care of by the parents. So that's something that we'd have to figure out after we cloned them or brought them back with a time machine, Nigel Marven style. Probably the best analog I could think of, both in terms of size and strength, but as well as social behavior, is the African elephant, actually. I think elephants, just strength-wise and especially size-wise, line up a little bit better, and especially social-wise. If we use specifically bush elephants, then it works for environment as well pretty too, as they lived in sort of similar foresty environments. For the bush elephants, indoor facilities must have room for animals to lie down and move freely. There should also be a way of separating animals if needed. Individual stall space should be at least 56 square meters or 600 square feet. I can't find a number for the rest of the indoor space for elephants, but the outdoor space should be at least 500 square meters or 5,400 square feet per animal in the habitat, which is really big. The walls or fences must be at least 8 feet or 2.4 meters tall. Moats should be limited, and staff should be protected from the giant horns of a Triceratops. So with all this in mind, we compare the size of an elephant to a Triceratops, or vice versa I guess, then multiply that number by these metrics, and this is how big of a Triceratops enclosure we should have. Granted, I will make it a little bit bigger when I start to build it, which is going to be right now. Notice we have two separate enclosures. This one that is empty for now would be where the male goes outside of mating season. Or potentially, if one of them gets aggressive or maybe even sick, we can put one over there for quarantining. The enclosure I tried to make resemble the Hell Creek as best as I could. And I think it turned out pretty well, especially with the rock usage. I love these new rebirth rocks, they're so pretty. You might have noticed that we do not have an actual fence, we just have a sort of like a wall. It's because we also have this retaining wall where if people were to somehow fall in the enclosure, it would sort of just fall in this sort of like little dip, if you would, and rather than falling into the actual enclosure. Granted, I don't think anyone's gonna be dumb enough to jump in the Triceratops enclosure, but people are stupid, so my point would very quickly probably be proven wrong. Speaking of you don't want people to jump into the enclosure, one of the biggest challenges of housing dinosaurs in a real zoo setting, how do you house a megatheropod like Tyrannosaurus Rex? Now, housing a megatheropod would not be for every single zoo, let alone every single paleo zoo. It would maybe just be for like the biggest of the bigs, like your San Diego zoos, I think Cincinnati Zoo is one of the big ones. It would be for your best of the best zoos. And even then, it would be an immense challenge to house not just a T-Rex, but any megatheropod, like Giganotosaurus, Acrocanthosaurus, something like that. And probably the largest theropods we could actually realistically house would be something like Allosaurus, or maybe your Abelisaur like Carnotaurus. And those would also come with their challenges, but not the sheer strength of a Tyrannosaurus Rex. What hasn't been said before about this gargantuan animal? It also lived in the Hell Creek alongside Triceratops, so we don't really got to talk about its environment. But famously, these animals were insanely massive. The specimen named Sue measured 40 to 42 feet long, and Scotty potentially reached 43 feet long. And the mass of this animal is thought to have been 8 metric tons, though T-Rex maybe exceeded these numbers based on some alleged monstrous animals, such as the Goliath T-Rex, and in captivity they likely could have gotten even larger. Tyrannosaurus also famously had a massive bite force of roughly 35,000 to 57,000 newtons, or roughly 7,800 to 12,800 pounds of force, which is likely the strongest bite force of any terrestrial animal to ever live. Tyrannosaurus also likely could run at speeds of around 20 miles an hour. Also, unlike in Jurassic Park, it can see you when you're standing still, with eyesight likely surpassing that of a modern eagle by 3 times. Also, it could smell you with olfactory bulbs comparable to those of modern vultures. Also, T-Rex is maybe a lot smarter than you as well, with the largest known brain comparative to its body size of all non-avian dinosaurs other than some small maniraptor forms, though it's still within the size range of modern reptiles. Some have argued that this large brain would mean it's as smart as a chimpanzee, but mammal and reptile brains are so different that that comparison doesn't really work. But still, insanely smart, and amazing senses. I didn't even mention its amazing sense of hearing. Oh, and it had pads on its feet that made it stalk silently. It was really just... Some people have suggested that T-Rex was an obligate scavenger, but you know, that person is a PDF file, so I refuse to acknowledge any of his ideas as correct. And even if he didn't, you know, like children, still he's just so wrong. There is an Edmontosaurus skeleton with a bite mark in its tail vertebrae that had healed in life, which likely this bite mark came from a T-Rex because no other large theropods really lived in the Hell Creek at the same time. And this wound ended up healing, meaning that the animal survived. But more importantly, that means that the Edmontosaurus was hunted by the Rex while it was alive, meaning that it wasn't scavenged. Also, why would you have noise-canceling pads on your feet if you were a scavenger? Tyrannosaurus was likely an opportunistic ambush predator. Again, it likely wouldn't have passed up a free meal if it found one, but still, ambush predator is most likely how this animal predated. Pack hunting is also possible, but not directly known in Tyrannosaurus. It is likely in relative tyrannosaurids like Tarbosaurus or Albertosaurus, but even for them, it's largely contested and sort of debated still. So we won't directly apply it to T-Rex, though I will still keep a breeding pair. During their juvenile teenage years, their diet would have consisted of small animals, and once they sort of reached their adult size in their adult years, they would have been hunting larger animals like Triceratops, Ankylosaurus, and Monosaurus, and maybe even Alamosaurus. T-Rex might have also eaten marine reptiles like freshwater mosasaurs and turtles, as well as fish that washed ashore. Now I am headcanoning that these two are a mating pair, but there is no direct parental behavior known in Tyrannosaurus. However, it's probable that it cared for its young after hatching for at least some time, as seen in Maiasaura, but also Oviraptorids. But again, you can't really apply this because they're about as far apart as you can get. And I do say these are a mating pair, but again, mating and reproductive behavior is unknown in Tyrannosaurus. I mentioned earlier that their diets would have shifted as they sort of grew, and that's because sort of their size shifted as they grew. Onto genetic niche partitioning, if you would. Tyrannosaurs likely started off small and gracile. Then around their teenage years, they skyrocketed in size to their adult massive proportions. Though this might be a little bit outdated because Nanotyrannus is valid again, and most of our juvenile T-Rex specimens we now know are Nanotyrannus. So it might not have skyrocketed as much as we initially thought, but it still likely would have if you compare the ontogenetic sort of ranges of other Tyrannosaurs, especially with Tarbosaurus, which is a really close relative of T-Rex. Also, with the fossils of Eutyrannus, that shows that these Tyrannosaurs likely could have had feathers. But in T-Rex, it most likely was mostly covered in scales, as evidenced by skin impressions that we have of T-Rex. Now, there's really no animal on Earth today that is even remotely comparable in the sheer size and strength of a Tyrannosaurus. The closest I could think of was a grizzly bear, since it's also a giant mesopredator. They can be housed in pairs, which I'll again try to do for T-Rex, and they lived in a somewhat similar forested environment. For grizzly bears, as according to the AZA, a large enclosure has been defined at least 1,000 square meters, though preferably more is needed. Also, this is per animal. Water in the enclosure is needed to allow cooling off. Also, I want to show off the T-Rex's swimming mechanics now, so they should also have sheltered areas, dry areas, and shaded areas. I can't find any required metrics for an indoor habitat, but we'll assume 50% of the space for one individual, I guess. The water for the animal to cool off and also, drink can be in a moat. I can't find the dimensions needed for said moat for a bear, but just assume very wide, very tall, very deep, especially since I want to see the T-Rex swim a bit. Also, I don't really know how tall the walls should be, but let's just make them insanely tall, insanely thick. Probably don't include glass, as it could get broken by a T-Rex pretty easily, probably, I'd assume. And do not provide any possible way of someone falling into the enclosure. Again, as we did with the Triceratops enclosure, we had sort of that retaining wall. We're going to do that same thing with the T-Rex enclosure. So even if there's a slight chance of someone falling in the enclosure of a T-Rex, they can't jump over that retaining wall or fall over that retaining wall and end up inside the enclosure and eventual jaws of a T-Rex. As if someone actually made it inside the enclosure, it would be instant death. Also, we need a safe way for our staff to feed said T-Rexes, because if you don't have that, you don't have fed T-Rexes. They get angry, they fight each other, they kill each other, they eat each other. That, or they get so angry they just break through their walls. So let's try not to do that, and let's build an enclosure for the Tyrannosaurus Rex. This enclosure, it turned out, I really love it. I sort of went for the more forested vibe of the Hell Creek Formation rather than the sort of more prairie vibe I did it for the Triceratops, and I'll end up doing for other Hell Creek animals eventually. Also, for safety reasons, the T-Rex area, if a T-Rex somehow got out, this area is entirely secluded from the rest of the area. Unlike Jurassic Park, again, we are not doing live prey feeders, we have just meat here. Also, a side note, I love the Rebirth Rex model. It looks so cool, I love it. We have their indoor area, of course. I don't know if this indoor area would be large enough, realistically, but I don't feel like fixing it, so that's okay. We, of course, have that retaining wall that goes all the way around the T-Rex viewing. We have areas for them to be secluded and not in the view of the guests in case they start to feel a little bit stressed out or they just don't want to be viewed for a minute. And yeah, these two, I think, would live a happy life in here. Hopefully they don't breed. We do have the male on contraceptives. And if that fails, we might be in a little bit of trouble. Because I didn't provide a way to separate the male and the female, I just realized. Oh boy. Now we move on to the final dinosaur of Jurassic Park. And funnily enough, it's the first dinosaur we see in the original Jurassic Park. And also, it was the biggest headache for me to design an enclosure for throughout this entirety of my research for this video. That, of course, is the Brachiosaurus. Brachiosaurus lived in the late Jurassic Morrison Formation, which would have been sort of a savanna covered in I don't know what I'm saying right now. I won't lie, I didn't write down much for the Brachiosaurus because it was a massive headache to figure out what animal could you even use to compare a Brachiosaurus to. There is nothing at all on Earth today comparable, if I can speak, to the sheer size and grandeur and scale of a sauropod. Granted, some smaller sauropods, maybe something like Amargasaurus, Bahatosaurus, Diplodocus even, Camarasaurus, you could slightly compare to modern elephants. But something as large as a Brachiosaurus, there's no good comparison. I ended up going with elephants again, as just the same metrics I used for Triceratops. That ended up with an enclosure this big per animal. Realistically, a zoo would not be housing a giant sauropod. It just wouldn't happen. And then you think, oh, we need to keep the male separate. If we have a male, we might not even need a male, but if we have a male, we need to keep it separate, because if they mate, they'll produce dozens of offspring per female. And then you gotta care for 30, 60, 90 new sauropods, because you can't just have little carnivores in the enclosure picking off the baby sauropods. And then the amount of food you need for these guys, the type of food you would need is most likely just conifers and stuff, but still. As we see here, the space requirements are insane. And not to mention, some sauropods are thought to have been very social. Animals like titanosaurs or diplodocids. So you need enough space for that, for them to not be, squished together and stressed out from that. So, would a zoo house a Brachiosaurus realistically? Probably not. But for the sake of this video, I felt the need to. I needed to find a way to house a Brachiosaurus. Even a small group of them. I decided on 3 females and 1 male. Stupidly, I decided to add a male, but I wanted the pretty colors. So I decided for Brachiosaurus to use the metrics of the elephants as we used for Triceratops. And there's also one thing I decided to steal from Hammond's Jurassic Park, and that is a vehicle tour. There are some zoos that have safari park tours today. If I remember correctly, I didn't do much research for this part of the video, I'm going off my general knowledge. I think the Bronx Zoo does have a safari tour. And this would sort of be the only way to have an enclosure big enough to house the Brachiosaur if you had a safari tour. Which is the one thing I will say Hammond got right. A safari tour would be the probably best way to house a dinosaur. I just wanted to specifically do a zoo because more fun. So with all that out of the way, let's get to building the final enclosure of today's episode. An enclosure for the Brachiosaurus. Despite the headache this has given me throughout this entire process of making this video, I think the Brachiosaurus enclosure turned out really fun. It's very open. Granted, there would maybe be some cohabitation happening in this habitat. Maybe you'd have smaller animals like Dryosaurus, or maybe other sauropods like Apatosaurus, Diplodocus in here, maybe Camarasaurus. But for now, we'll stick with just Brachiosaurus. We of course have feeders for them to eat from. They're able to socialize. We have some shelters for them. We have a giant barn for them. Thank you to the blueprint creators on the workshop. You guys are godsends for this park. And of course we have the Jurassic Park tour going all the way around. We have some water at the front for them to sort of wade in. We have a river going down the middle. And of course it's meant to sort of look like sort of the savannah of Africa, because that's kind of what the Morse information would have been like. Kind of deserty, kind of just like a savannah, yeah. And with that out of the way, Jurassic Park San Diego is now ready to open. Starting off with 7 enclosures, only 2 of which housing animals from the Jurassic, by the way. We've built this from the ground up, pretty much. We are on the mainland, so people can come see these animals pretty much whenever they want to. We can get supplies whenever we need it, and also the climate is better for these animals. We have done our best to supply the needed amount of space for these animals. Granted, in the end, it might not be the actual size requirements for them, because again, we don't know how much space these animals would have actually needed in an enclosure, because they are long dead. This is the best we can do based off the minimums of modern zoo requirements. And I have left space in this park for expansion. We will be continuing this park. We will be adding, eventually, my plan is to add, in this park, every single species in the Jurassic franchise. A little bit ambitious? Yes. Am I excited to do so? Yes. But for now, I've been Connor. Thank you for joining me on this little bit more of a fun video. Not as educational as I want it to be, really. But still, I hope you learned something. And I hope you stick around for the next part, where we talk about the dinosaurs from the Lost World and Jurassic Park 3. If you want to see more content from me, you can check out my channel, where I post irregularly. For the Jurassic June, I play the Lego Jurassic World. I have the Jurassic World Evolution 3 campaign on my channel. I, of course, do a lot more educational videos than this. I highly recommend you check out some of them. I have another one coming out in a couple days' time from this video. If you also want to get to know me a little bit more, you can check me out in my socials. All links in the description below, like, down there. It's like down there, If you did enjoy this video, please leave a like, as that tells me to keep making videos like this. And also, it pushes these videos into the algorithm so that someone doesn't have to sit and watch AI-generated slop content. And lastly, if you too, just like me, like paleontology and dinosaurs, feel free to subscribe for more. I hope to see you next time. And I don't know how to end this video, so I'm going to take a sip of my tea and just go to an end screen.